You know, life has a funny way of teaching lessons when you least expect it. Sometimes it's through strangers, but sometimes it's through the very people you'd give your last dollar to. I'm Margaret, 72 years old, retired nurse, lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, all my life. I thought I had seen every kind of pain, sickness, heartbreak, loss. But I never thought betrayal would come from inside my own family. If you're listening right now, let me tell you something. Never ignore that small feeling in your gut. It's quieter than love, but a whole lot more honest. Now, if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story. It's a warning. It's a lesson wrapped in heartbreak, revenge, and justice. The kind that only life itself could write. It all started 5 years ago, after my husband passed. 50 years together. And just like that, I was alone in the house we built brick by brick. My daughter, Anna, and her husband, Mark, lived just across town. They had 2 little boys, my pride and joy. Mark was charming. Too charming, if I'm honest. The kind of man who looked you straight in the eye when he lied, and smiled doing it. He ran a small construction business, said he wanted to build a legacy for his family. I admired that. I believed him. When you're older, you want to see your family secure. To know your life savings helped create something that will last. So when Mark came to me one evening with that polite smile and said, "Mom, I hate to ask, but we're on the edge of something big. Just need a little push." I didn't think twice. He talked about permits, contracts, growth, words I didn't really understand but trusted because he was family. Anna sat beside him, holding his hand. "Mom, it's a good investment," she said softly. "We'll pay you back. You'll even get a return." I smiled. "Honey, I'm not doing it for a return. I'm doing it for you." And so I did something I never thought I'd do. I used part of my pension, the savings your husband leaves you to grow old safely, and gave it to Mark. That night, I slept easier than I had in months. I thought I'd finally done something meaningful again. But a few weeks later, things started to shift. Mark stopped visiting as often. Anna seemed distant. And whenever I asked about the business, Mark would change the subject. One afternoon, I stopped by their house unannounced, carrying a pot of stew for the boys. Mark's truck wasn't there, but Anna's car was. When she opened the door, her eyes were red. "Mom, now's not a good time," she whispered. I frowned. "What's going on, Anna? Is everything all right?" She looked over her shoulder nervously. "Mark's been stressed. Please, just give him time." But that gut feeling, the one I told you about earlier, it started whispering louder. Something wasn't right. The following week, I got a letter from the bank. My heart nearly stopped. It said my account had been restructured due to a collateral guarantee tied to Mark's company loan. A loan I had never signed for. I went cold. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. My pension was listed as security. That night, I sat at the kitchen table for hours, staring at the paper. The house felt heavier than ever, full of echoes of a man I wished were still there to protect me. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the phone rang. It was Anna, crying. "Mom," she said between sobs, "Mark's gone." "Gone where?" I asked, confused. He left. The business went bankrupt. The house, it's being repossessed. He took what was left in the accounts and disappeared. I couldn't breathe. All those years of saving, all the trust, all the love, gone with one signature I never made. And the worst part? It wasn't just money. It was my home. The house I'd lived in for 40 years was now under foreclosure because of that loan. When I went to confront Anna in person, she wouldn't open the door. I could hear her crying inside, but she didn't let me in. And that's when I realized, Mark hadn't just stolen my pension. He'd stolen my daughter too. But here's where the story turns. Because I might be old, but I'm not done. Not by a long shot. So before we go further, take a second, click that like button if you believe karma always finds its way. Because what comes next? It's proof that sometimes, revenge doesn't come with anger. It comes with intelligence and patience. Because I wasn't about to go quietly into homelessness. No. I was about to teach my dear son-in-law what happens when you underestimate a woman who's got nothing left to lose. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I kept seeing Mark smile, that polite, confident grin, twisting into something darker the more I replayed it in my head. At sunrise, I made myself a pot of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the foreclosure letter. My husband's photo sat across from me, his old army frame catching the morning light. "David," I whispered, "if you were here, you'd know what to do." But he wasn't. So I had to figure it out myself. If you're still listening, I want you to remember this. Never assume you're too old to fight back. Because the truth? That's where strength hides. And I was just starting to find mine. The next day, I went straight to the First Carolina bank, the one that sent the letter. The young man at the desk looked surprised to see a gray-haired woman with a folder of documents and a voice steady as steel. "Ma'am, may I help you?" "Yes," I said. "You can explain how my name ended up on a business loan I never signed for." He blinked, then fumbled through the system. His expression shifted from polite to uneasy. "Mrs. Parker, it shows you co-signed on a $280,000 small business expansion loan. That's why your pension was collateral." I leaned in, my voice sharp. "I never signed anything of the sort." He turned the monitor slightly, showing me a scanned document. And there it was, my name, my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. The letters were stiff, awkward. The loop on the M didn't even match how I'd written it my entire life. I felt my stomach turn cold. Mark had forged it. "Can I get a copy of this document?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He hesitated. "I'm not supposed to." I looked him dead in the eye. "My home is being taken because of a forgery." "Print the document." He did. When I got home, I laid it out on the table beside my old checkbook, lined up the signatures, and there it was, the proof. Every curve, every line wrong. I called Anna. Straight to voicemail. I texted. No response. 2 days later, I drove to their house again. But this time, it wasn't a home anymore. The front yard was littered with boxes, movers hauling furniture. Anna stood on the porch, pale, eyes hollow. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking. "Mark, he cleaned out the accounts. He left 2 weeks ago. I don't even know where he went." "Did you know about the loan?" I asked, my tone sharp. Her silence was the answer. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "He told me it was just paperwork, said it would help secure the business." I swear, Mom, I didn't know. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But it hurt. God, it hurt. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about trust. About family. About giving your heart to people who use it like a doormat. The following week, the foreclosure notice arrived. 30 days to vacate. I packed slowly, one box at a time, every memory folded and taped shut. My wedding china. My husband's army medals. The baby blanket Anna came home from the hospital in. It felt like burying a life. But you see, sometimes pain sharpens the mind. And mine was sharper than it had ever been. I went back to the bank and started asking questions, polite ones at first. Where were the loan funds wired? Who approved the documents? What was the business name? Turns out, Mark had created a shell company, Carolina Urban Renovations LLC. He'd taken the loan under that name, moved the money into a personal account, and then transferred it offshore. The same week he disappeared, he'd also sold their vehicles, drained the family savings, and wiped his phone records. He didn't just leave, he vanished. But the mistake he made was small. Tiny really. Something only someone meticulous, like me, would notice. On one of the old contracts, buried in a scanned folder, there was an email trail. A note from Mark's accountant with an attachment labeled Asset Transfer Plan. And do you know what was attached? A list of properties, one of which was a lake house under his name. A property he had bought months before the bankruptcy. Paid in full. That was the first crack in his little empire of lies. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, my heartbeat steady. "Oh, Mark," I whispered. "You might have run off with my money, but you left your fingerprints all over it." And that night, I made a promise. To my husband's photo, to myself, to every woman who's ever been taken advantage of. I remember the sound of my hands on the steering wheel as if it were a separate memory. The way they gripped, white-knuckled, when I left the bank that morning. That grip was the shape of the way my life had tightened. Fear coiling into purpose. I was 72, and suddenly I had more fight than I'd felt in my entire life. Not a juvenile, hot fury, a cold readiness. Betrayal had a way of teaching you how to move. For days I drifted between anger and sorrow. I would sit with Anna and listen to her cry, and my chest would ache for the daughter I knew. But loyalty doesn't mean blind trust. Watching her, I realized loving someone doesn't have to mean letting them be used. Anna had been hurt by Mark's deception, yes, but she had also been complicit in a life that let him manage their money unchecked. I couldn't punish her for being victimized, but I had to act so no one else would be hurt in the same way. First, I needed allies. I didn't want to be the elderly woman shouting into the void. I wanted facts that couldn't be dismissed. I called Paul, a neighbor whose sister was a forensic accountant and who'd been a steady presence at our church potlucks for years. Margaret, he said without pause when I explained, you've got traces. People like that always leave them. Let us follow the money. He didn't say it romantically. He said it like a man telling me the next logical step. That steadied me more than anything. Paul's sister, Sarah, agreed to look at the documents I'd started collecting. She came over with a laptop and a calm face, and within an afternoon she had mapped a path of transfers. The bank loan wired into an account with a business name, then siphoned through a web of smaller withdrawals and, crucially, a transfer to an address that matched Marlowe Properties, a small real estate holding company. It was thin, technical, and exactly the thing you needed to unravel a con. Those little registrations were public records, and Sarah knew how to pull them. You're dealing with someone who thought he was invisible, she said later, turning the laptop to me. But nothing is invisible if you know where to look. There's a lake house under his name. He hasn't sold it. He's tried to hide other assets through shell transfers, but the filings show his fingerprints. Her confidence felt like an arrow hitting a target. I wanted to cheer, but the victory tasted like metal. My money wasn't back yet. My home was still at risk, but there was a way forward. I called the county clerk's office and requested property records. The lake house was registered, and the deed included a mortgage paid in full. Suspicious for a man whose company declared bankruptcy. That meant there was likely a separate account, separate funding. Sarah suggested we subpoena banking records as part of a civil suit. That would cost money I didn't have, but there were ways to fund a legal fight without emptying the coffers. I called my church, the women's group I'd been part of for decades, and explained the situation without dramatics, just facts. They rallied in a way that warmed me. Small donations, a fundraiser, offers to help with paperwork. I had community, and that turned out to be gold. Then there was the more painful emotional work. I had to prepare myself for going public. I am not the kind of person who likes center stage. I'd always preferred the quiet dignity of doing good without applause. But Mark had turned my dignity into collateral. If I wanted him to be exposed and held accountable, people needed to understand what had happened in terms they could grasp. Stories stick where facts alone sometimes do not. I spoke with a lawyer named Denise, recommended by a fellow church member. She had practiced elder law for years and had that firm, motherly manner that makes you feel both chastened and protected. We'll file an emergency motion to halt foreclosure, she told me. And simultaneously, we'll file a civil suit for fraud. If we can show forged documents and evidence of misappropriated funds, we'll get discovery. That means access to the documents that show where he sent the money. Legal talk can feel like another language, but Denise translated it into something clear. Traction. Denise also warned me about media. Going public helps, she said, but be careful. We want to compel a legal outcome, not just a viral moment. That said, community pressure moves banks and individuals faster than forms sometimes. I liked that balance. We began a 2-track plan. Legal action to freeze the house and begin discovery, and a strategic, modest media release to local press that wouldn't sensationalize, but would put a light on the pattern. I didn't want to humiliate my daughter. I wanted the truth to be visible. Emotionally, this was harder than any paperwork. I had to reconcile the woman I'd raised with the man who'd exploited us. I had to show up not as a furious mother seeking revenge, but as a wronged person seeking justice. That meant keeping my composure in front of Anna, not using her pain as my theater, and focusing on the paperwork that would save our home. It's a strange kind of love that makes you both tender and strategic. We prepared the emergency motion. Denise filed it with the court and requested a temporary restraining order to prevent the bank from foreclosing while the case moved forward. The judge set a hearing date 2 weeks out. In the meantime, Sarah dug deeper. She found emails from Mark's accountant that didn't just suggest transfers. They detailed plans to move assets to entities run by people who had the same P.O. box as a shell company registered in another state. She also found a wire transfer to an offshore account with the initials ML, Mark's initials. It was a breadcrumb trail. And I had a dogged woman who enjoyed following it. But if there's one thing a con artist counts on, it's time and confusion. Mark was smart in a slippery way. He'd gone dark, but not stupid. He'd pulled money, created plausible bankruptcy, and then let the messy aftermath roll out like a wave. He banked on our shame and confusion to slow us down. He underestimated the quiet fury of an older woman whose life had already been carved into the walls of the house he'd threatened. I also began thinking outside of courtrooms. People like Mark live by perception. The idea that they're successful, in demand and untouchable. If perception shifts, doors close. So I reached out to an old reporter friend, Maria, who now freelanced for a local Charlotte paper. I didn't want a tabloid smear. I wanted a careful piece that laid out the factual timeline. Pension used, forged loan, disappearance, suspicious property purchases. Maria listened, took notes, and agreed to look into public records. She didn't promise headlines. She promised truth. Meanwhile, at home, daily life continued in small, aching ways. I slept in different positions to avoid the ache in my shoulders. I learned how to read legal notices. I sat with Anna and the boys and tried to keep dinners normal while the whole world felt like it might collapse at any moment. My courage was a small thing, practiced in the quiet moments when I stacked dishes, when I folded the boys' laundry, when I answered the phone and kept my voice even. There were setbacks, too. The bank pushed back, saying the loan documents were valid until proven otherwise. Anna's calls slowed, part grief, part denial. Friends who didn't understand asked awkward questions. I had to steel myself against shame. The shame of being deceived is loud in your head. I had to push it aside and keep moving. One night, while sorting through old boxes, I found a ledger my husband had kept. A small thing where he jotted down who borrowed what, who owed what. It was a map of our life. It smelled like old paper and cedar. I ran my finger down the pages until I found a note. Margaret, keep for taxes. His handwriting made me laugh through tears. That ledger became a touchstone. A reminder that life is built on long, honest labor, not sudden, slick deals. It gave me patience. As the week of the hearing approached, we finalized the plan. Denise would present the forged signatures, Sarah's tracing of the money trail, and the discovery request that would pull in the bank's records. Maria would run her researched article the day after the hearing, but only if the court allowed the temporary stay. The timing mattered. The point wasn't spectacle. It was to make sure that the legal vehicle had the momentum it needed. On the eve of the hearing, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the neighborhood settle. The setting sun washed the houses in honey light. I felt a quiet nervousness settle in my bones. Not the panicked fear of before, but a present, alive feeling. I thought about Mark. Where he might be, if the lake house was empty, if he'd counted on anonymity to keep him safe. I thought about my daughter and the boys, about the life we needed to protect. And I thought about what comes after courtrooms and headlines. The hard work of rebuilding trust, paying back what was stolen, and learning to be cautious without becoming cold. There was one last piece we'd yet to secure. Direct evidence that money had been divested to Mark personally and not used for business expenses. Sarah believed it existed. Invoices with fake vendor names, wire transfers disguised as contractor payments. If we could get that, the case would not just be a family fight, it would be criminal. As I locked the front door that night, a neighbor called out, "Good luck tomorrow, Margaret." Their words landed like a small blessing. I felt the weight of their eyes and their faith. For all the layers of betrayal and the complicated emotions, I had something no fraudster can buy. Community, records, and a determination that had turned my fear into action. If you're still here, please press like and subscribe to follow the rest of this story, because what happens next is where plans meet consequence. The morning of the hearing arrived like a storm. I woke early, dressed in a simple navy dress, hair pinned back, and a calm exterior that belied the whirlwind in my chest. Anna hovered nearby, pale, clutching her hands together, while the boys played quietly on the couch. I kissed her forehead. "We'll get the truth out," I whispered. She nodded, tears in her eyes. We drove to the courthouse in silence. I kept my hands on the steering wheel, feeling its familiar texture as a grounding force. Every thought replayed the past months. The forged loan, the stolen pension, the empty house, and every pang of betrayal fueled my resolve. At the courthouse, the building felt immense, its stone walls cold, almost judgmental. But I reminded myself, I wasn't here to be intimidated. I was here to reclaim what was mine, and to expose the truth. Denise, my lawyer, greeted me with a small smile. "You've done the right work, Margaret. Today, it's about showing the evidence, not yelling at him." The courtroom filled slowly. Bank representatives, Mark's attorney, and even a few local reporters who had been tipped by Maria arrived. I noticed a man in the back scribbling notes. Mark? No, too casual. Mark wasn't here. Typical. The hearing began. Denise approached the judge, a stern woman with silver hair and piercing eyes. She laid out the case calmly. The forged signatures, the pension used as collateral without consent, and the web of financial transactions moving money to shell accounts and Mark personally. I felt my chest tighten as she displayed the first pieces of evidence. The side-by-side comparison of my authentic signature versus the forged loan documents. The judge leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "Mrs. Parker," Denise said, "the defendant has acted deceptively, placing his mother-in-law's assets at risk while misrepresenting his business's financial situation. We request a temporary injunction to prevent foreclosure, and to allow discovery into the diverted funds." A murmur passed through the room. Then Denise called Sarah to testify. She walked the judge through the trail of wire transfers, explaining in simple terms how money had been siphoned through multiple accounts to Mark personally. Even the bank representatives squirmed under her precise, undeniable logic. Mark still hadn't appeared. By late morning, the judge turned to the courtroom. "Has the defendant submitted any response?" No one spoke. The room was silent, heavy with anticipation. Denise leaned toward me. "He's not showing. That's interesting. Might indicate he's afraid of this evidence being scrutinized." And then came the twist. One of the bank officials whispered something to Denise. She raised an eyebrow, then smiled slightly. "Your Honor, we've obtained a recent transaction confirmation. The lake house Mark purchased months ago. The funds came from one of the offshore accounts he transferred from. We request that it be temporarily seized and added to restitution." Gasps. The judge nodded, her fingers tapping on her notes. At that moment, the courtroom door opened. Everyone turned, and there he was, Mark. Slightly disheveled, suit wrinkled, eyes darting nervously. He tried to speak, but Denise raised her hand. "Please, sir. Let's address the facts first." But if there's one thing a con artist counts leaving echoes of clicking heels and shuffling papers. Mark was smart in a slippery empty gallery for a moment, dark, but letting it all sink in. He'd pulled money, safe, created plausible bankruptcy, Mark's scheme exposed, and then let the messy aftermath roll out like a wave. Exhaustion, he banked on our shame and confusion to slow us down. The sunlight hit the underestimated the quiet fury of an older woman whose life had already been carved into the walls of the house fought for money or property. I also began thinking outside of my home. People like Mark live by perception. Anna came to my side, the idea that they're holding the boy's hands, in demand and untouchable. "I don't know what to perception say," shifts, she whispered. "Doors close." I smiled so gently. I reached out to an old reporter friend, anything, Maria, just who now freelance for a local Charlotte paper, that we don't let someone like him take advantage again. I wanted a careful piece that laid out the factual timeline. Freely. The media coverage continued for days, but in a careful, factual way. It praised my patience, diligence, and agreed to look into public showing records. That justice doesn't always roar. She didn't promise headlines. Sometimes it's quiet, methodical, and undeniable. At home, Mark's daily life continued in small, aching ways. The court ordered him to return different positions to avoid the ache in my shoulders. Pension and other stolen assets. I learned how to read legal notices. Attempts to flee further were blocked as authorities and tried to keep dinners normal tied to the shell companies. Felt like it might collapse at any moment. He faced potential criminal charges for fraud and forgery. I didn't celebrate in the quiet moments. There was no gloating, Justice when I folded the boys' laundry, when it comes with pain, when I answered the phone and kept my voice even. And there were setbacks balance too. Had returned. The bank pushed back. I spent the next few weeks restoring my home, were valid, organizing my pension documents, Anna's and reconnecting with my community. Part grief, part denial. Friends who had helped, friends who didn't understand ways visited questions, sharing meals. I had to steel myself against and reassurance. The shame of being deceived came over to play in the backyard. I had to push it aside and keep moving. New memories. One night, through all of this, I learned something profound. I found a ledger my husband doesn't have to break you. A small thing where he jotted down who borrowed strategy and resilience. It was a map of the depth of your own strength. It smelled like old paper and cedar. Karma I ran my finger down the pages until I found a note. Mark rely on others' trust to build a temporary empire. His handwriting made me laugh through tears. And diligence have a way of dismantling even the cleverest lies. A reminder that life is built on a letter to him, honest labor, though I never sent it. Sudden, slick deals. I didn't need to. It gave me patience. It read simply. As the week of the hearing approached, the quiet strength we finalized the plan. Powerless. Denise would present the forged signatures, and so Sarah's tracing of the money trail. Anna and I rebuilt our bond slowly. That would pull in the bank's records. Trust Maria would run her research article the day after the hearing, small but only if the court allowed the family dinner, a holiday together. The timing mattered. Laughter that wasn't shadowed by worry. And for the first time in a long while, I felt had the momentum it needed. If you're listening, on the eve of ever felt betrayed, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the neighborhood settle. Sometimes the setting sun washed the houses. Sometimes it's clever. I felt a quiet nervousness settle in my bones to be broken. Not the panic fear of before you leave this story, but a present, alive feeling. Like this video, I thought about subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear that courage isn't defined by age, counted on anonymity to keep him safe. Because I thought about my daughter and the boys, but it's how we respond that defines the outcome. And I thought about what comes after. I reclaimed my life, my home, and my dignity. The hard work of rebuilding. I learned that justice doesn't always need to roar, and learning to be cautious without becoming cold. And it always arrives. There was one last piece we'd yet to secure: direct evidence that money had been divested to Mark personally and not used for business expenses. Sarah believed it existed: invoices with fake vendor names, wire transfers disguised as contractor payments. If we could get that, the case would not just be a family fight, it would be criminal. As I locked the front door that night, a neighbor called out, "Good luck tomorrow, Margaret." Their words landed like a small blessing. I felt the weight of their eyes and their faith. For all the layers of betrayal and the complicated emotions, I had something no fraudster can buy: community, records, and a determination that had turned my fear into action. If you're still here, please press like and subscribe to follow the rest of this story, because what happens next is where plans meet consequence. The morning of the hearing arrived like a storm. I woke early, dressed in a simple navy dress, hair pinned back, and a calm exterior that belied the whirlwind in my chest. Anna hovered nearby, pale, clutching her hands together, while the boys played quietly on the couch. I kissed her forehead. "We'll get the truth out," I whispered. She nodded, tears in her eyes. We drove to the courthouse in silence. I kept my hands on the steering wheel, feeling its familiar texture as a grounding force. Every thought replayed the past months: the forged loan, the stolen pension, the empty house, and every pang of betrayal fueled my resolve. At the courthouse, the building felt immense, its stone walls cold, almost judgmental. But I reminded myself, I wasn't here to be intimidated. I was here to reclaim what was mine, and to expose the truth. Denise, my lawyer, greeted me with a small smile. "You've done the right work, Margaret. Today, it's about showing the evidence, not yelling at him." The courtroom filled slowly. Bank representatives, Mark's attorney, and even a few local reporters who had been tipped by Maria arrived. I noticed a man in the back scribbling notes. "Mark? No, too casual." Mark wasn't here. Typical. The hearing began. Denise approached the judge, a stern woman with silver hair and piercing eyes. She laid out the case calmly. The forged signatures, the pension used as collateral without consent, and the web of financial transactions moving money to shell accounts and Mark personally. I felt my chest tighten as she displayed the first pieces of evidence. The side-by-side comparison of my authentic signature versus the forged loan documents. The judge leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "Mrs. Parker," Denise said, "the defendant has acted deceptively, placing his mother-in-law's assets at risk while misrepresenting his business's financial situation. We request a temporary injunction to prevent foreclosure and to allow discovery into the diverted funds." A murmur passed through the room. Then Denise called Sarah to testify. She walked the judge through the trail of wire transfers, explaining in simple terms how money had been siphoned through multiple accounts to Mark personally. Even the bank representatives squirmed under her precise, undeniable logic. Mark still hadn't appeared. By late morning, the judge turned to the courtroom. Has the defendant submitted any response? No one spoke. The room was silent, heavy with anticipation. Denise leaned toward me. He's not showing. That's interesting. Might indicate he's afraid of this evidence being scrutinized. And then came the twist. One of the bank officials whispered something to Denise. She raised an eyebrow, then smiled slightly. Your Honor, we've obtained a recent transaction confirmation. The lake house Mark purchased months ago. The funds came from one of the offshore accounts he transferred from. We request that it be temporarily seized and added to restitution. Gasps. The judge nodded, her fingers tapping on her notes. At that moment, the courtroom door opened. Everyone turned. And there he was, Mark. Slightly disheveled, suit wrinkled, eyes darting nervously. He tried to speak, but Denise raised her hand. Please, sir. Let's address the facts first.